You're listening to Fletcher C. Johnson. I'm Fletcher C. Johnson. I don't want to claim to know anything about the fashion world or fashion trends over time, but I've always been really into fashion, personally. It's something that's excited me. It's something I've always put a lot of time into. From adding studs and spikes and patches to my leather jacket, to dealing with all the hassles that go along with having long hair, to tailoring my own clothing, it's been an important art form in my life, and something that I've just found to be really fun. I've changed my look a lot, sometimes following popular trends, but oftentimes just doing my own thing in my own time. But in any case, I never stayed with one look very long. I guess that's not exactly true, because having one look when I have a look is maybe the most consistent thing about my style. I'll pick a style like I'm going to be country, or I'm going to be anarcho-punk, or I'm going to be cuddlecore. And then I'll find a pair of pants and a shirt or two that I think look great, and they fit me perfectly. And then I'll wear that outfit basically without changing it for like a year straight, until I want a whole new look. They say people decide how they feel about you in the first 10 seconds of meeting you. Actually, I think they say women decide if they're going to sleep with you in the first 10 seconds of meeting you. But in either case, I just made sure I looked good in that first meeting, and then I basically look exactly the same for each subsequent meeting, until I decide to look totally different. I don't know if anyone who knows this little about clothing should be putting this amount of time into exploring clothing. I only know the things that I've done and the shit I've seen on the street, and my memory's pretty bad. But in any case, here it is. A podcast on the complete history of fashion as I know it. I'm from a small town in Vermont. Population was 171 when I graduated high school. I had 11 people in my graduating class, and that was 3 towns that came together to make that many people. And this is a public school. My town is pretty conservative, pretty redneck, and fashion was not a priority there. Outfits were either bargain bin or thrift store or hand-me-down clothing, which is where me and my brother got most of our clothing. It was actually a great place to grow up because money was not a priority when it came to popularity, not in any way. You look at a TV show like The OC, where the rich kids run the school. We didn't have anything like that. I'd never even met a rich kid. In many ways, the poorest kids were the most popular because they were the wildest, and if you were the wildest, you stood out. But we only had 11 people in our grade, so everyone was included if you wanted to be. The most fashion you would see would be like someone wearing a name brand shirt. In the winter, there was definitely kids walking around in -0-degree weather wearing just a name brand sweatshirt because they couldn't afford a name brand jacket. They had the sweatshirt and they wanted to look cool. I mean, this would be the most someone would work at fashion in my town, would just be freezing for fashion so they could look cool in their name brand sweatshirt, the one thing that they could afford. I didn't think about clothing at all. I just let my mom buy my clothing and pick out what I wore on a day-to-day basis until I started skateboarding at the age of 13 in 1993. I'd gotten a couple skateboard magazines and maybe one video, and I asked my parents for a pair of Airwalk 1 skate shoes. My parents were blown away that I wanted a specific item of clothing. So they threw me and my brother in the car, and we ended up going on like a 3-town journey trying to find these things. When we finally found them, everyone was really excited. It was a great day. And that began my foray into fashion. I didn't ask for much more. I got a couple of skateboard t-shirts. I remember going to a skate shop that had a Santa Cruz shirt in the window that I was really taken by. I had the person working there pull it out of the window, and the entire front had become so sun-bleached from being in that window for who knows how long that it was a completely different color than the back of the shirt. And the attendant was like, I don't think you want to buy this thing. And I was like, no, please give me that sweet Santa Cruz shirt. It was like extra large, and I was the smallest human being you could possibly imagine, but I was so proud to wear my sun-bleached Santa Cruz shirt around. Of course, the early 90s saw the rise of Jinko jeans. These were not popular in my school. There was no other skateboarders. It was just me alone, and I became obsessed with getting a pair. I brought it to my parents' attention, and I'm sure they made fun of me a little just because of what the pants looked like, but also they were kind of expensive, so they couldn't get me a pair. Later, I was going through my mom's closet, and I found this pair of overalls that she had that were gigantic. I put them on and slapped a t-shirt over the top of the straps, and you could still see the straps, so I put on a second shirt and then a third shirt. And with 3 t-shirts, you couldn't really see the overall straps anymore, and I thought I'd pulled it off. I now had these gigantic jeans. Obviously, there was no waistline on the pants, but that was covered up by the extra-large sun-bleached Santa Cruz shirt. I convinced my mom to let me wear them to school. I knew this would kind of freak people out because no one was accustomed to having pants this wide. What I didn't realize was that immediately they saw the straps through the t-shirts, and they accused me of being a girl wearing a bra. So that was kind of the end of my Jinko experience. In 1994, Green Day Dookie came out, followed closely by Rancid and Out Come the Wolves, and I just became obsessed with punk. I didn't even know what it was, but I knew I wanted more of it. I'd heard punk songs in skateboard videos, but I'd never actually seen what punks looked like. You can see what skateboarders look like in the skateboard videos, but besides seeing a guy with a mohawk in like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, I didn't really know what punks were. I just knew that I wanted to be one. In 1995, I got an opportunity to get out of my small town. I went to live with my grandmother for a summer down in Long Beach Island, New Jersey. I could get a job down there and start saving up for a car, which is what I desperately wanted to get out of my town. Long Beach Island is basically like a retirement community. Everyone is old there. It is not a party beach by any means. But, there was other grandmothers with grandsons around my age, and I went there looking for punks, basically. There was a strip where all the kids spent their time walking around at night, so I started cruising the strip and immediately found 2 or 3 punk kids that I just became obsessed with. Now, maybe it should be noted at this point that while I had a couple of cool skateboard shirts, I had no jeans. I didn't have Jinko jeans or any other jeans. My parents are both back-to-nature hippies that moved to this really redneck town, and I guess maybe as a rebellion against the rednecks, my mom did not bring jeans into the house. Everything was tan khakis with pleats. So I had my sun-bleached Santa Cruz shirt over a pair of pleated tan khakis. I had a center part at this time, cropped just a little above the ears, giving my head the appearance of the head of a penis. And I didn't know I could change this. I just thought, I'm born with a center part. Some people are born with a side part. Some people are born with no part at all. I looked at these couple of punk kids that I had met. They had, cool jean jackets with jeans, some patches on them, some spiked up hair, maybe bleached a different color. And there I was in my Santa Cruz shirt with the center part and the pleated khakis. I looked down and I said, at least there's one thing I can change. I got to do something about the khakis. I went back to my drawer and dug through and I found a pair of gray khakis. And I thought, well, gray, that's pretty punk, right? So I pulled those out and that's the only thing I wore that entire summer. Years later, I was still friends with those New Jersey punk kids, and I was basically telling them this story, telling them about how I had the khakis, but I put on the gray ones to look more punk. And they said, khakis? We thought you were wearing gray sweatpants the entire summer. These pants were so worn out, they basically looked like a faded pair of gray sweatpants. So my attempt to look more punk failed completely. By the end of that summer in New Jersey, I'd learned about some cool punk bands that I never would have found through skateboarding, and I developed just a general sense of what punks were into. And I was in love with it. I just wanted more. I got home to Vermont and then used the money I'd made working that summer to get a car and some kind of jeans and a jean jacket. Now, I'd heard somewhere that punks cut the sleeves off their jackets. I did not quite understand what this meant, so I cut my sleeves into short sleeves, like I cut them at the bicep and left that bit just hanging there. I added some patches that I bought down at the shore, just like a processed Sex Pistols patch or something I got at a skateboard shop, but I was starting to get something going. Eventually, someone informed me that my center part was not a permanent fixture, so I had it all chopped down so it was about the same length. I wanted to spike it up, but I didn't know what you used. Hairspray was totally foreign to me, so I got a jar of hair gel. I totally lubed my hair up and hit it with a blow dryer while kind of hanging my head upside down, and what it turned into was these tiny wet curls. It just looked wet and curly. That was my original spiked hairdo. Now that I had a car, I was able to do a little bit of traveling. I found Brattleboro, Vermont, which was a small city about 30 minutes from where I grew up. My school actually allowed you to take 1 year of classes over at Brattleboro Union High School as long as you enrolled in their vocational program. I took a tour of the school, and on that first visit, I saw a kid walking around with a mohawk, so I said, yes, I definitely want to come here. That kid turned out to be Kyle Thomas, actually. On my first day of school, I was sitting alone in the cafeteria, and this goth kid came running up to me, and he said, "What's your name?" "Okay, cool. We all meet at this tree after school. Come find us." I showed up at the tree with my wet curly hair and my short sleeve jean jacket, and they were totally accepting of me. They were happy to have another one amongst their ranks. These Brattleboro kids were way ahead of me stylistically. They had some cool leather jackets. They had these crazy bondage pants. They had tons of patches. Punk patches were incredibly hard to come by in Vermont, whether you knew what you were doing or not. And that became an absolute obsession to me. I had to get more cool punk patches. One of the Brattleboro kids, this kind of drunk punk named Ted, gifted me a Casualties patch on our first meeting, and I just cherished it. The thing was so faded it almost wasn't a patch at all, but if you squinted in just the right way, you could tell that it said the Casualties on it, and I proudly sewed that onto the short-sleeved jean jacket. The Brattleboro kids introduced me to some cool record stores, and they showed me this little shop in western Massachusetts where you could buy studs and spikes to put on your jacket yourself. Every time I had a little spare change, I would buy a few more of these studs and try to really get my outfit poppin'. And I kid you not, I slapped these studs all the way around the cuff of my short-sleeve denim jacket. Oof. I got some patches off friends. I got some patches at shows. I started going to punk shows in Boston. It was only a 2-hour drive, and I would take the Brattleboro crew out with me almost every other weekend. The Boston punk kids were on a whole nother fashion level. By the late 90s, street punk in Boston had become huge. DIY shows could have a couple hundred kids showing up, and people were decked to the nines. I think by this point, maybe I'd removed the short sleeves from my jean jacket, and the patches were surmounting. I proudly sewed on everything I could get my hands on. Eventually, it covered my entire pants. So they were basically like a quilt at this point. A quilt of punk bands from waist to cuff. Additional patches were included on the jean jacket along with all of these studs that I was acquiring. As we went to more shows, we got to know more of the Boston crew to the point where they invited us to hang with them in Harvard Square, where the punks loitered during the day. On my first visit to Harvard Square, though, they started to immediately rag on me. "Are you a hippie?" they asked. "Why do you have so many patches on your fucking pants? You're wearing a quilt." I looked around, and the Boston kids, they would have like 2 to 3 carefully selected, well-placed patches on their pants or on their jacket. Less is more is what I learned. But what they could not get over was how baggy my pants were. The late 90s were prime time for relaxed fit jeans. I, who was totally new to jeans still at this point, was not prepared for the idea of alterations. The punk kids had it streamlined, super tight fit, sometimes with a zipper installed at the bottom just to get it over your ankle. This is pre-stretch material, so we're talking rock hard jeans as tight to your body as you could get them. Well, there I am with my baggy quilt for pants, and they're calling me Jinko Boy because they're so wide. These fucking Jinkos came back to haunt me again. In any case, this day in Harvard Square sent me on a decade-long mission to find the perfect fitting tight pants. As tight pants have now become basically the universal pant of the United States, it may be difficult to wrap your head around the fact that in the late 90s, tight pants were basically the definitive sign of alternative culture. Whether you were a goth kid, whether you were a metal kid, a punk kid, an indie kid, your physique could be spotted from a block away by your tight pants. If I saw someone I had never met with tight pants walking towards me, I said, "Oh, this guy is probably pretty cool." But likewise, tight pants did not really exist. You certainly couldn't buy them in a store. You basically had to make them yourself. So I used the skills I had honed through sewing on all those patches, and I tightened my shit up. But coming from doing the patches, I did it all wrong. I sewed the pants tighter, but on the outside, so the stitches were visible. Now, this worked with the punk clothes because there was still all kinds of weird patches and shit going on, but this will come back to haunt me when I've left punk behind and I'm still sewing my pants tighter on the outside. This is another mistake that I will have to correct in public. It also should be noted that these tight pants were not cool outside of our small alternative culture. Like, you were ruthlessly made fun of everywhere you went. By bros, by rednecks, by macho guys. Basically, any normal guy you met on the street was either going to call you a girl or a homosexual or some other name that they figured would hurt you. But these names didn't hurt me at all. It just made me happy to be even farther distanced from these people. By this point, my punk look is pretty pulled together. My pants are tight, I have the right amount of patches on them. I got my jean jacket with the sleeves completely removed. I got a leather jacket that I found in the dumpster that I've totally covered in studs and spikes, and it looks fucking sick. I've got a mohawk. I actually had a bihawk. I had two hawks, but it was asymmetrical. I had one down the middle and then one running up the side like a little sidecar for a motorcycle. All in all, I was pretty comfortable with my punk look. But now it's my senior year of high school, and I've already taken my 1 year over at the vocational program in Brattleboro, so I'm back to my little school, and I'm not happy about it. Now, it should be noted, everybody was really nice to me there. Like, they were like, "Oh yeah, Fletcher, he's a punk now, that's okay." Like, there's 11 people in my grade, what are they gonna do? But I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be around these rednecks. I'd found these punk kids in the other town, and as a fuck you to everyone at my school, I started wearing the same pair of dirty gray sweatpants to class every single day. I refused to give them the satisfaction of even seeing me dressed up at all. I took a Sharpie and I wrote Tommy Hilfiger, spelled all wrong, just spelled off the top of my head on the sweatpant, just to prove that I didn't care about labels or something. I mean, I was 18, I don't know. And then I would get out of class and I would go home and put on my punk clothing and then go to Brattleboro and hang out with the new friends I'd made over there. I don't know what the kids at my school thought about my sweatpant look. I mean, they probably didn't care at all, but it made me feel better about having to go there. I moved to Boston in 1999 and began attending college. I had no interest in going to college. I really didn't want to go at all. My parents, who are great people, really wanted me to go. They really wanted me to, and I just wanted to make these nice people happy. I got a pretty decent scholarship, and my parents said they would take care of all of the rest of the costs. So I said, okay, I'll go. and I'll get perfect grades for you. Straight up, being a completely decked out punk in college was a little bit embarrassing. There I am with my mohawk. I've got this American flag that I've set on fire and turned upside down and sewed onto the back of my sweatshirt, and I've written a political slogan on it. And I'm in the well-lit dorms prancing around trying to appear tough, I guess. But whenever I get out of class, I go hang out with all the punk kids. So I finally moved out of my small town. I've made it to a big city. I'm completely immersed in the punk scene, and it doesn't take me more than 8 months before I start questioning whether I want to be around these people at all. As a way of distancing myself from the punks a little bit while I'm trying to figure it out, I start wearing this stripped-down punk look. I'm wearing plain t-shirts, and I get a pair of green Dickies, which I sew a Spaz patch onto the bottom cuff. The Spaz is a 90s power violence band that I loved. And I start having this stripped-down look, which is kind of punk, but a little off to the side. The only thing I'd known since I was 15 was being punk, so I was trying to get out of punk, but I didn't exactly know how to do it. At the end of my freshman year, I catch a bus out to the West Coast. I'd really been in love with what was going on in Berkeley in the 80s and 90s in the punk scene, and I decided to see if the West Coast still has anything like that going on. I hitchhiked from Seattle down to Berkeley, stopping in different towns, and basically learned that the punks out there are not any better. If anything, they're worse. Stylistically, there was a big difference between the Boston punks and the West Coast punks. Boston had a very studs and spikes, boots and braces type street punk thing going on. And on the West Coast, I was hanging with mostly crust punks and train hopper kids. Man, everybody out there had the Carhartt double-stitch knee pants. Everybody. Everyone, everywhere. Every kind of punk you saw had these Carhartts. It blew my mind how universal it was. Now, I know that punks fly this flag of individuality while, basically just being outcasts that are looking for friends. And it's really common to have uniforms, like any other social group. But these Carhartt double-stitch knees were something I hadn't seen in Boston, and it was just, every city I stopped in, Eugene, Portland, Seattle, and all through the Bay Area, everybody had them. Everyone. I ride a bus 3.5 days back to Vermont, and sure enough, there's punk kids hopping off trains left and right in the Carhartts, and it started filtering into the East Coast. But by this point, I was totally fed up with punk. I'd been disappointed on both coasts, and it didn't matter to me at all what they were doing. I begin my sophomore year, and I'm questioning what my new look should be. How am I transitioning out of punk? I'm in this collegiate setting, and indie rock is all around me, and these are a lot of ex-punks, ex-hardcore kids. It's an easy move to make. There's one big difference in this transition, which is, for the first time in my life, I start wanting some clothing that actually costs money. Money that I didn't have. Like you could go down to Banana Republic and get a sweater that fit in with your indie style, but that was going to cost you like $70. I remember this kid on my floor named Zane gifted me a black windbreaker that maybe he had grown out of or something. It was super simple. It had no pockets, it had a high collar, and it just kind of had like a late 90s indie look. I cherished this thing. I wore it all the time. And now I was in a position where I didn't have any cool jackets. I only had this windbreaker. So the temperature was getting down below zero and I was still just wearing it every day, freezing my ass off, trying to look cool. Once again, in the indie scene, tight pants were a priority. But no one was making tight pants for men, except for Diesel Jeans. Diesel Jeans had started marketing their pants as omnisexual. It was for men and women. The late 90s were a time of really low-rise pants for women, so if you were trying to strap into a pair of women's pants, basically the top of your dick was hanging out. The Diesel Jeans had a bit higher waist, but they also had a much higher price tag. These things were like $125, which was absolutely money I didn't have. So this began my life of shoplifting. I went into the Diesel store on Newbury Street in Boston, which was a tiny little shop where the attendant actually had to bring you every pair of pants you tried on. They let me go into the dressing room with my backpack, but the attendant was keeping track of how many pairs of pants I had. So I just got this attitude of joyful exuberance about trying on pants. I started going, oh my God, these are amazing. Do you have anything with a little bit higher waist? Oh my God, but what about if the leg stopped here? Oh, do you have this? Do you have that? And he was just bringing me more and more pants as I excitedly chattered on until the point where he had no idea how many pairs of pants I had, and I threw a pair in my bag. And I think I told him like I was gonna go to an ATM and take out money or something, and then I just never came back. I went and got that Banana Republic sweater. I remember there was some like cool tan indie stuff that you could steal from the Gap. The Gap at this point actually started making some women's pants with a little bit higher waist. And I remember like the word spread through the indie scene like, holy shit, you got to get down here and get these pants. This is the answer to the tight conundrum. Those pants, for whatever reason, didn't fit me, but I stole a couple pairs just to make sure. Unfortunately, I was also stealing from some cool independent thrift stores. You know, places that were really inappropriate to be stealing from. But that's just the culture that shoplifting leads you into. Now, even with the diesel jeans, I still had to take them in a little bit because I'm so fucking skinny. Like, I'm about as skinny as a human being can be while still generally looking like a normal human being. Of course, this is where the stitches on the outside of the pants started looking a little bit odd. I remember people coming up to me and being like, oh, that's a cool choice. I see what you did there. And I'd be like, well, yeah, I took them in. I mean, that's what you have to do when you take them in. You have stitches on the outside. There's no way to make that invisible. That's how you make them smaller. I dyed my hair black to fit in with my indie look. But at this point, I started really having a problem. My hair was falling out. My dad had it even worse. He started losing his hair when he was like 17. So I guess this was bound to happen, but that doesn't mean I was prepared for it at all. I was really shy. I'd barely had a girlfriend at this point. And of course, I was devastated by the hair loss. I remember getting in a fight with some kid in the cafeteria, just a verbal fight. And one of the insults he yelled at me was balding. And God, I mean, my heart just sunk. Fortunately, right as this was becoming a big issue, a guy took me aside. Actually, Zane's roommate took me aside. And he said, I just got on this hair loss pill called Propecia. You got to try it out. This was just lucky timing for me. Propecia had just hit the market like 2 years before. It's a 1-a-day hair loss pill that worked wonders for me. The hair loss slowed to a stop, and then you actually grow a little bit of hair back. But this was a couple-year period where my hair was looking pretty raggedy. Indie rock, like punk, has some pretty extreme hair looks. You got the hair that's swooped down in the front but kind of standing up in the back. You got the Spock look. You got the hair sticking down in front of your ears like little triangles. I was trying a couple of these styles, but it wasn't pretty. I found a winter hat that fit with my indie look, and that got me through a little bit of time, but there was a lot of bad stylistic choices all through this period. I want to take a moment to say, I love bad style choices. I love when you don't know what you're doing and you're just trying to figure it out. You're going to hear me changing my style a lot through this and fumbling around, and those are really my favorite times. When you're first trying to figure it out and you don't know what you're doing and you're really excited about it, but you're making those huge mistakes in front of everybody. That is when it's exciting. And I think those mistakes will keep you young. When you know exactly what you're doing, when you know that what you're doing is correct, that's when you're a grown-up. It doesn't matter if you're punk. People think punk is youthful. But if you're a punk and you've been doing it a while and you know that everything you're doing is correct by punk standards, then you're just an adult punk. You're not staying young. But if you're older and you try something for the first time, you try something you've never done before, and you're excited about it, that's when you stay young. If you're 60 years old and you just decided to become a candy raver, hell yeah, go buy a bunch of fucking jelly bracelets. That's what I love. I really think fondly of these transitional periods where I was just fucking everything up. In 2001, the first Strokes record came out. and this was a big change for me both musically and stylistically. Immediately upon hearing that, I decided I was going to be rock and roll. Now, this was just a small tweak on the indie look. I mean, I traded in my jean jacket for like a corduroy jacket. I traded in the diesel jeans for a pair of brown slacks, which again I took in by putting stitches on the outside of the pants. I grew my hair out, what hair I had, into like a Beatles rubber sole type cut, and I was just trying to figure out what a rock and roll guy would look like. I didn't know any other rock and roll kids. I think a theme through many of my stylistic choices was picking looks that no one else I knew was doing. I like clashing against all of my friends, and I like just kind of the fuck you attitude of I'm not going to look like you. Me and Kyle Thomas started a rock and roll band called The Curl. A key to our look was each of us getting a pair of Wallaby Clarks. I don't know why, but we decided that was the most rock and roll shoe we had ever seen. Kyle and I recorded a record, and then we took our rock sound and look out to the West Coast on tour. This tour ended in disaster. Me and Kyle started hating each other. We ended up driving from Eugene, Oregon back to Vermont without speaking to each other. I guess, like my trip out west looking for cool punks, this rock and roll trip left a bad taste in my mouth. When I got back to Boston, I was fed up with rock and roll and with indie and with punk, and I was homeless, or at least I was crashing on friends' couches, for a couple of years. During this time, I had a buddy, Scandalous Eric, who was in the same boat as me. At least we were both couch surfing, and we spent a lot of time together. We'd often crash at the same houses and ended up sharing a bed or sharing a futon pretty regularly if there was only one comfortable place to sleep that was available. I remember waking one morning on a futon with Eric laying next to me. I could tell he was awake. I was staring at the ceiling and just contemplating what I was going to do next. And then finally I said out loud, "I'm going to be a hip-hop kid now." And Eric, without missing a beat, said, "I'm going to be a thug." We got up, went down to Urban Outfitters, which I had seen was selling Nikes, and stole a couple pairs of those. We went over to the Levi's store and tried on like 1 million pairs of jeans. Transitioning from tight pants to baggy pants, or from baggy pants to tight pants, is something that's very confusing to wrap your head around. You become accustomed to seeing your legs at a particular proportion, and when you change that, it looks incredibly wrong. But I found a pair that I deemed suitable and stole those. We went to the baseball cap store in downtown Crossing to get some fitted hats. Fitted hats had just kind of hit the scene. I think sports franchises were selling them in the stadiums for the first time, and it was fun to be on the cusp of this new look. The baseball caps you had to buy, they kept them behind the counter, so you had to save up. I mean, these fuckers are like $30, but we got a couple Red Sox hats. We went over to Marshall's and stole some name brand t-shirts and sweatshirts. To go from mockingly writing Tommy Hilfiger on my dirty gray sweatpants to actually purposefully getting a name brand shirt was the biggest 180-degree fashion turn that I've ever made. So we had our Nikes, our baggy jeans, our branded crew neck sweatshirts, and our baseball caps, and we hit the town. And our friends fucking hated it. No one was on board with what we were doing. At the time, I was attending Emerson College, which has a bunch of rich kids from New York City that go there for the arts, and most of them are hip-hop kids. I remember seeing a group of these kids when I'm walking down the hallway one day and pointing at the allergy shirt I was wearing or something, and kind of giving them a nod. They just shook their head. They weren't having it. All of my friends weren't having it. But I was just pumped on how I looked. Like, I felt great. I finished college in 2003. After graduation, I went out to New York City, and then I headed out west for a while. But by 2004, I ended up crash landing back in Boston again. One day I'm biking down Commonwealth Avenue and I run into a friend who says, "Oh, I just went to Kmart and stole this Radiohead CD. They don't even have it in a package. You can just go over and take it." And I think to myself, well, I like Radiohead. Okay, I'll go grab a CD. I don't know. I get over to Kmart and I find that the CD is now in that plastic packaging that keeps you from stealing it. I'd already made the trip over there, so I was like, well, I guess I'll get the CD. I had a Leatherman on me, and I went to town trying to rip the plastic off. While I'm doing that, I look over and I see this guy staring at me. He has on like a dashiki, or longer than a dashiki. It's like a full man dress. And he's giving me the eye, but I don't think much of it until I'm exiting the store and I hear a voice behind me that says, "Don't run." I turn around, and there's the guy in the man dress. He reaches under the dress and pulls out a pair of handcuffs and shakes them at me and says again, "Don't run." I'm right at the door, and this guy's still in the store, and I think I even flinched to make a run for it. But this dude was 7 feet tall, and he had no pants on, which probably makes him more aerodynamic or something. So I just hung my head and went into the back room, and that's how I finally got busted for shoplifting. Kmart has what I guess is a policy that they won't call the cops if you pay them $300. And I was like, oh yes, I'll definitely pay that. I absolutely do not want to get the police involved in this. You don't pay on the spot. They send you a bill in the mail that you have to pay. And they took my driver's license and said, "Would you like us to send the bill to this address?" And I said, "That's fine." And it wasn't till a couple days later that it occurred to me that the address on my driver's license was my parents' address. Now, if there's one group of people I wanted to deal with about this even less than the police, it was certainly my parents, so I'd made a big mistake. I called up Kmart and I asked if I could change the address where the bill was being sent to, and they were actually really kind. They were like, "Oh, I wish we could, but we've already sent it out." So I had to tell my parents that I'd been caught shoplifting a fucking Radiohead CD by a guy in a dashiki. First off, my parents refused to pay that $300. They were like, "This is extortion." I think they sent $40. I don't know where they came up with that number. And they were like, all right, if they have a problem, they can come talk to us. Of course, secondly, they were really disappointed in me. Later, my mom took me aside and said, "I didn't think things were this important to you." And that really affected me. The shoplifting culture leads you to a place where you end up just taking things because you have an opportunity. You see an easy thing to take, and you just take it. And you end up with a gluttony of stuff. I had come out of punk with a really anti-capitalism, anti-consumerism mentality, so I was just really disappointed in myself. And it took me getting caught shoplifting at Kmart for me to see it, I guess. That was the end of my illustrious shoplifting career. So I'm living in Boston, I'm working at a coffee shop, I'm spending all my time listening to Jammin' 94.5, which is the local hip-hop station. I get super into country music at this point. I grow a mustache. I looked really young. I still look really young. But when I was 24, I looked like I was 16, so that wasn't helping me out with the ladies. The mustache added a year or two to my appearance. But just as it's starting to look good, I come home from work and learn that my roommate Phil had blown our toilet up with fireworks. He'd blown the bottom right out of the toilet. So I decide it's time to move to New York City. My first job in New York City, like many people I know in the mid-2000s, was working at American Apparel. They were hiring people by the hundreds. Of course, that American Apparel aesthetic really did change New York City's look for a while. It ushered in all those weird 70s looks, which of course my mustache fit right in with. I remember working that first job I had down in the Jersey Shore in 1995, and my boss always wore leggings, and I just remember thinking how trashy it was. At that time, my only reference for leggings was Peg Bundy from Married with Children. But now, in 2004, they were everywhere. My look didn't change that much. I was still wearing the baseball caps. I started growing my hair out really long. I got a pair of white jeans that I started wearing every day. I made my own Black Sabbath shirt using spray paint and decided I was going to wear that shirt every single day until it fell off of my body. Sometimes I would wash it at night and then just leave it on a hook to dry and put it back on in the morning. And I made it the better part of a year wearing that. What finally brought on a stylistic sea change for me was when I began performing music live again. Since me and Kyle had done that ill-fated Curl tour, I'd still been writing and recording music, but I hadn't been performing. My love of country music had widened into including folk and bluegrass and old blues music, and I began performing folk songs under the name Poor Boy Johnson. This old-timey sound that I was making did not correspond with the hip-hop look, and I decided that the carpets had to match the drapes. So I sadly hung the hats up. I mean, the hats had been great for my thinning hair, but hats were out of the question. I made a conscious decision, you will not wear hats anymore. I hit some local thrift stores and get some vintage Levi's, which I then take in. But this time, I do it by putting the stitches on the inside of the pants. I figure out how it's done. It's very simple. It's actually easier than the crazy way I'd been doing it up to this point. I get some cowboy boots. Of course, again, the mustache can stay. For some reason, the mustache works with everything. There's some sweaters going on at this point. I get some flowing scarves, get some fucking beads, and I just have a full-on 60s folk look going. By 2006, I get an opportunity to take my love of country farther. I join a country rock band called The Wait. I'm playing lead guitar, and like the actual 60s folk musicians, my style transitions into kind of a sloppy 70s rock look. I start sewing the tight pants to be a little bit baggier, a little bit sloppier. I throw on kind of an oversized flannel shirt or maybe a corduroy shirt. I grow my hair out really long and turn the mustache into a full-on beard. So I'm playing in this country rock band. I've got this 70s country rock look. We're touring quite a bit, and we're playing with a lot of power pop bands who are their own subculture of 70s worshipping dudes with their own specific 70s style. When you get this deep into 70s worship culture, I mean, you're basically like a LARPer. You're live action role playing that it is the 70s, and you're walking around in your 70s outfit talking about things that happened in the 70s as if they're happening now. You're discovering music from that time, and you're acting like it's a brand new band that just came out when you're telling your friends about it. Honestly, it's all pretty fun. I had a great time doing it. Right now in 2020, everyone's live action role playing that it's the 90s, and that seems pretty fun too. I don't know. During this time, I had a Rastafarian pin that I wore on everything. It was the Ethiopian flag colors just on a 1/4-inch pin. And if I was wearing a sweater, I'd put it on the sweater. If I was wearing a t-shirt, I'd put it on the t-shirt. If I was wearing a jacket, I put it on the jacket. Everything I wore always had the same pin on the front of it. One year, my roommate, Ann Seymour, went as me for Halloween. She borrowed some of my clothes and I guess drew on a beard. And she asked if she could borrow the pin because that would really pull the entire look together. I was reluctant, but she promised that there was no way she would lose the pin. And of course, she lost it. I don't know how this happened. It surprised me. It surprised her. I couldn't believe I hadn't lost the pin at this point. But she felt so bad about it, she bought us both plane tickets to Jamaica. Ann Seymour is a very adventurous person. At this point, she'd already been all around the world. I had never left the United States. So going to a third world country, which is what Jamaica is if you're not sitting inside of these resorts, well, that was totally eye-opening for me. Anne's plan was to avoid anything touristy, which is hard to do considering Jamaica's totally built on tourism, but we took backpacks and just hitchhiked around the country. We stopped in small towns and in the big cities and found cheap places to stay, and everyone we met was very kind to us. Although it was inevitable that me, a white guy with long hair and a big beard, would be made fun of on an everyday, all-day basis. We'd walk into a restaurant and everyone would get quiet. They'd look at me, then they'd look at each other, and eventually someone would say, "You looking for some food? Jesus!" And the place would fucking lose it. Everyone would be screaming, slapping on tables. Everyone, everywhere called me Jesus and thought it was the funniest thing on earth. We'd get on the bus to go somewhere, the whole place would be totally silent, staring at us, and then someone would say, "Looking for a ride? Jesus!" And they would be screaming. They loved me, or they loved making fun of me, but either way, I felt very accepted. Now, sometimes we'd go into a small town where white people never went, and some little kid would see me. Now, Jamaica is very Christian. A lot of people go to church on Sunday, and they worship a white guy with long hair and a beard. These little kids, who had never seen a white guy before, saw me turn the corner with my long hair and beard, and their mouth would just drop to the ground. I mean, they thought, "Oh shit, that's the guy. That's the guy that we pray to. He's right here. What the fuck do I do?" And I'd give them a wave, and that was pretty cool for me, because for a moment, I was Jesus. I got back to New York, and the country band was falling apart, and I started working on the first Fletcher C. Johnson solo record, It Rained Something Wicked. Between the time that the first Strokes record came out in 2001 and this period, which was 2009, I'd only been going farther and farther back into music. I'd gotten into rock and roll, then I brought it back to early blues. I was learning about country, but I hadn't listened to anything contemporary. Really, for that whole 8-year period, I was only listening to stuff from the 30s to the 80s. I just totally checked out of modern music, except for hip-hop, which I was listening to the contemporary hip-hop station. But in 2009, I decided I was going to catch up on what was happening in modern music and modern fashion. This will be no surprise to you if you were paying attention at that time, but what I found was that everything was just mixing together. You could take a style from the 90s and just mix it with something from the 70s. The indie bands were definitely wearing fitted baseball caps at this point, so I happily dusted my hats back off, and it was just kind of a free-for-all. By 2010, one huge change had occurred that I did not see coming. I could now go to a store and buy a pair of pants, and they were as tight as I wanted them to be. No stitches on the outside, no stitches on the inside. I could just put them on and walk right out the door. When I first discovered this, I bought like half a dozen pairs because I didn't realize this would be a long-lasting trend. I thought, no one's going to buy these things. They'll be off the shelves in a week. I better buy them now while I still can. The quest to find tight pants had been, this epic decade-long journey for me. I couldn't imagine it being over any more than Frodo could imagine parting with the ring. But Levi's made the 510s, and my job was done. I went through a couple more weird phases. I had a period of time where I only wore purple. I got purple pants, purple shirt, purple shoes, purple hat. Wore purple every day, I don't know, for 6 months or something. I did a tour where I only wore a suit. I only brought a suit. I wore the suit when I was driving. I wore it when I was sleeping. We went to a pool party and I wore it while I was swimming. My hair was long. I cut it short. I grew it back out till it was long again. I got some Keds because the Ramones always look really good in Keds. I got some crazy print sweatshirts. I got a Mishka hat that I was in love with. And all in all, this was just a very playful time in fashion for me. Things were great until about 2015, when everything started feeling very off. At this point, I was about to get married. My wife, who is 9 years younger than me, well, her and her friends were all wearing these really wide pants that were hemmed about 6 inches above their ankle. She looked at me in my tight pants and told me I was not cool. Now, maybe it should be expected that a 35-year-old guy would be kind of out of touch with fashion, but it just caught me off guard that I had strayed this far. I'd spent years digging through bargain racks and then learning how to hem those pants myself, all to prove that I wasn't part of mainstream culture. And now, the tight pants had become mainstream culture. You can go down to Wall Street and everyone's wearing tight pants. You can go to Midtown and all the bros are wearing tight pants. I live half a block from the projects. Everyone there is wearing tight pants. I had a plumber come over to fix my toilet. He was wearing tight pants. Tight pants were the most mainstream thing you could do. So I took myself out to some used clothing stores and scoured the racks. And just like my transition to hip-hop 12 years earlier, I just had to wrap my brain around these wider proportions. And you know what? I felt good. Like, my look felt fresh. It was the coolest I'd felt in quite some time. It's wild because styles from my childhood are back. Things that I myself longed for in the 90s are popular with high schoolers again. This is the first time I've been alive for a complete fashion loop. Like, the full cycle all the way around. In the 90s, I always wanted a pair of Doc Martens, but they're insanely expensive. This is not something I even dreamed of asking my parents for. But now on this second loop around 90s fashion, I realized that I'm an adult with my own money. So a couple years ago, I strolled down to the shoe store. It was a warm New Year's Day, actually. And I bought myself a pair. And when I left, I felt cool. If you feel good about your look, that's it. That's all that matters, because that's how you get confidence. And confidence is everything. When I decided to be a hip-hop kid, I was still just hanging out with the same punk kids I was hanging out with before. Like, I was still trying to impress the same indie rock girls that I was flirting with when I was dressed indie. And the fact that my look now totally clashed with what these girls were doing, it didn't matter at all. Because I felt like I looked great. They don't give a shit if you look like them or you look like a fucking moon man. As long as you feel good, they will think you look good. Those people are going to be into you. So that's all I can tell you. Keep trying new things. Stay young. Look cool in your own eyes. That's fashion. This episode started out nearly 2 hours long before I cut it down to an hour. I have so much to say about clothing. If this episode worked correctly, you should be saying to yourself, this is just Fletcher holding a microphone and rambling for an hour. But this was definitely not the case. Like all my other episodes, this podcast was scripted, and then the script was read by me. I've got to be one of the worst actors in the world, so reading the script in a natural voice was a crazy challenge. After finishing this episode, I actually went back and re-recorded the voiceover for the previous episodes, just utilizing all the new skills I'd learned by doing this one. For this reason, and many more, I'm asking for financial support from you listeners this year. If you can give $5 for the 5 episodes, that'd be awesome, but support of any amount is really helpful. No amount is too small. But for those of you who give $10 or more, you will receive one bonus full-length podcast episode, as well as a 30-song album of outtakes and rarities from my musical catalog. All money can be sent to me directly through Venmo. My Venmo is @FletcherCJohnson. Or you can send the money through PayPal. My PayPal is FletcherCJohnson@gmail.com. If you give the $10 or more, please include your email address in the notes with the payment so I can send you all that bonus stuff. Also, if you gave $5 before and you want to add $5 more in a second payment to get that bonus episode, just include a note with the second payment and I'll figure it out. Next week's episode finds me, my brother Matt, and Kyle Thomas on the road in a tiny Honda Civic. It's the prelude to the night that my brother slept in that bunny hut, as told in the Messin' Up My Mind podcast episode. Of course, in next week's episode, we end up sleeping somewhere weird as well. You've been listening to Fletcher C. Johnson. I'm Fletcher C. Johnson. Thanks for listening.